The Keth had a word for the moment. Before a civilization died. Velsharath, it meant roughly the silence of a candle that has not yet been told. It will be blown out, a poetic word. The Keth were in many ways a poetic people. They wrote songs about the worlds they burned, they commissioned sculptures from the bones of conquered species. They held festivals on the anniversaries of their greatest victories and drank something that smelled like copper and tasted like grief. High Marshal Greveth of the Third Expansion Fleet thought about Velsharath as his ship cut through the dark between stars. He liked thinking about it. It steadied him. The fleet behind him was 4,216 ships, destroyers, carriers, sea platforms the size of small moons, troop transports carrying 12 million soldiers who had trained for exactly this kind of operation, planetary pacification. Keth called it for their entire adult lives. Greveth had done this 23 times. 23 civilizations had looked up at Keth, warships filling their skies, and understood too late that the universe had never been kind and had only ever pretended to be. The 24th was called humanity. Greveth had read the intelligence reports 3 times. Humans were young species, barely 400 years into space. Travel, their territory was small. Modest cluster of star systems on a quiet arm of the galaxy, mostly focused on a single planet called Earth that sat around an ordinary yellow star. Their weapons were decent, but nothing extraordinary. Their fleet numbered somewhere around 600 ships, according to the last Keth intelligence sweep, most of them patrol vessels and light cruisers. Nothing that would challenge a fleet of 4,000. What had made humanity interesting, at least briefly, was a period about 30 years ago when they had gone very quiet. All their deep space transmissions had dropped off, their exploration vessels had turned back, their communications, once bright and constant and aimed cheerfully at every corner of the galaxy, had gone nearly silent. Keth intelligence had spent a decade trying to understand why. The current theory was that humanity had detected the Keth expansion and panicked, that they had pulled inward, retreated to their core systems, and were now sitting there trying to fortify what little they had. Scared animals did that. They hid, they waited, they hoped that if they were quiet enough, the predator would pass them by. The predator would not pass them by. Greveth stood at the great observation window of his command deck and looked at the stars ahead. At this speed, the light from human space was already visible, a faint warmth in the dark, the radiation signatures of their sun. Distance to the boundary, he said. 4 hours, High Marshal, said his navigator. 4 hours, then the fleet would cross into human-designated space, and the final stage of expansion protocol would begin. First would come the broadcast, a standard Keth Dominion declaration, translated into every human language on record, giving them 6 of their hours to begin formal surrender proceedings. In Greveth's experience, no civilization ever actually surrendered in that window. They used the time to scramble their ships, call their leaders, make speeches that history would never record. Then the fleet would advance, then the battle would happen, then it would be over. He had it planned down the hour. Any new contacts, he asked. None, High Marshal. Human space appears quiet. We are detecting standard patrol traffic near their outer colony worlds, but nothing mobilizing to intercept. That was normal too. They would be watching his fleet on their own scanners right now, watching and understanding, mathematically, that they had no answer for what was coming. He almost felt something that could have been pity. Almost. The first sign came 2 hours from the boundary. It was not dramatic, it was not loud, it was a single notation from the fleet's long-range sensor array, flagged automatically and routed to the command deck because it did not match any known human signature on record. Contact single vessel, position human. Space near the boundary line, dead ahead. Gravath looked at the report. He looked at it for a long time. One ship, he said. Yes, High Marshal. From the human fleet. Unknown, the signature doesn't match anything in our records, it's the sensor. Officer paused, which was not something sensor officers were supposed to do. They were supposed to be clinical. Professional, it's very large. High Marshal. Define large. Another pause, approximately 47 km in length. Mass readings are consistent with a deep space installation rather than a vessel, but it is moving. Gravath turned from the window and walked to the sensor display himself. He stood in front of it and read the numbers and read them again. 47 km. His own flagship, the Ascendant Throne, was 9 km from bow to stern and was considered one of the largest warships ever constructed by any known civilization. He had been proud of that. Standing on its command deck felt like standing inside a mountain that had decided to become a weapon. 47 km. The thing ahead of them was 5 times that. Time to visual range, he said. At current relative speeds, approximately 90 minutes. Route all long-range optical data to my screen the moment we have it. He spent those 90 minutes reading everything his intelligence staff could pull together about this contact, which was almost nothing. There were no records of humanity constructing anything near this scale, no intelligence reports, no intercepted communications referencing a project of this magnitude. His intelligence chief stood at his shoulder and explained with increasing discomfort that this was simply not something that should exist. Could it be from another civilization? Gravath asked. Someone using human space as a staging area. We have no record of any spacefaring species in this region of the galaxy capable of constructing something at this scale. High Marshal. The nearest candidate would be the Vorath Collective, but their shipbuilding capacity is nowhere near. Then it's human. It appears to be human, yes. And we had no intelligence on it. The intelligence chief did not answer. There was no answer to give. When the optical data came in, Gravath stood at his screen and looked at it for a long time without speaking. The ship was dark. That was the first thing he noticed. Most warships of any species carried running lights, heat signatures, the glow of active systems. This one was almost cold. It sat in space like a piece of the dark that solidified and grown sharp edges. Its hull was a non-reflective black that swallowed light rather than scattering. Its shape was angular and brutal. Not elegant the way Keth ships were. Elegant, not flowing or curved. It had been built with no consideration for how it looked, only for what it did. Along its flanks were structures that his weapons analyst could not immediately classify. Not standard gun batteries, not missile tubes, not energy projectors of any type currently on record. Arrays of something vast, symmetrical, precisely spaced, running the full length of the ship like ribs on a creature that had never learned to be afraid of anything. It was not moving toward them. It was not moving away. It was simply there at the boundary of human space waiting. Has it made any communications? Grevath said. No, High Marshal. Any weapon signatures, any power readings that suggest charging weapons. No active weapon signatures, power readings are elevated but stable. It's running at high capacity but not doing anything with it that we can detect. Grevath studied the image he had faced down the planetary defenses of civilizations far more technologically advanced than humanity. He had watched entire defense fleets break apart against his numbers. He was not a man who frightened easily. He had, over 40 years of conquest, developed what he considered a very clean and rational relationship with danger. What he felt looking at the image of this ship was something different. It was the feeling of looking at something that did not care whether he was afraid of it or not. Distance to contact, he said. 300,000 km, High Marshal. We crossed the boundary in approximately 2 hours. Grevath straightened. His fleet was 4,000 ships. A single vessel, even one of unprecedented size, was not a meaningful military obstacle. Numbers were numbers. Physics was physics. Maintain course and speed, he said. Route additional sensor arrays to the contact. I want a full analysis of those structures on its hull within the hour. And open a standard hailing frequency. All human languages on record. The communications officer obeyed. The message went out, the standard Keth declaration, the formal announcement of inevitable conquest, translated into 57 human languages and broadcast across every frequency the Keth knew humanity used. Grevath waited. The dark ship said nothing. It did not power up its weapons. It did not attempt to maneuver. It did not launch fighters or send a shuttle. It sat at the edge of human space with the patience of a thing that had been there for a long time and expected to be there for a long time more. The fleet continued its advance. In the deep sensor reading, something was happening inside that ship. Power was moving vast, almost incomprehensible amounts of power cycling through those unclassified hull structures in slow, deliberate pulses, like a heartbeat, like breathing. The weapons analyst flagged it and stared at the numbers and flagged it again. High Marshal, she said. I don't know what those structures are. I don't know what this power signature means. I have never seen anything like it. Best guess, Grevath said. She looked at the numbers one more time. It's not charging to fire at us. It's charging to do something I don't have a name for. Grevath looked at the dark ship on his screen. It looked back at him with no eyes and no expression and no heat. 2 hours to the boundary. His fleet advanced. The ship waited. On the command deck of the vessel, the Keth had no name for yet. A woman named Admiral Nadia Kovacs sat in a chair that had been specifically engineered to be slightly uncomfortable so that no one fell asleep in it during long operations. She was 61 years old. Her hair was gray and cut very short. She had a coffee cup in her left hand, the fourth of the day. All of them terrible because good coffee required a gravity environment, and the Harbinger ran at 0.6 G by design to save power for other things. The coffee tasted like sadness filtered through a paper cup. She drank it anyway. Around her crew moved at their stations with the focused quiet of people who had trained for this specific moment for years and had now arrived at it and found it looked exactly as they had expected. There was no panic on the deck of the Harbinger. There was no drama. People checked systems. People read numbers. Someone at the far end of the deck had a protein bar they were eating in small, careful bites, trying not to make noise. On the main screen, 4,000 Keth warships were advancing. Kovacs watched them come. Pulse cycle at 92%, said the systems officer to her left. His name was Ensign Tomas Reyes, and he was 26 years old and had never seen a battle in his life and was handling this remarkably well. Hold at 92, Kovacs said. Don't push the full cycle until they cross 150. Yes, Admiral. She drank her coffee. The Keth fleet was beautiful in a terrible way. All those lights in the dark, all that power and intention. Moving in perfect formation, confident in the arithmetic of force. She had studied the Keth for 30 years. She understood them. She thought better than most humans alive. She understood their logic. She understood what it felt like to look at a weaker opponent and know the outcome before it happened. She understood it because she was feeling it right now looking at them. They've gone quiet again, said the communications officer, hailing. Frequency is open, but they've stopped broadcasting. They're watching us, Kovacs said. They're trying to figure out what we are. She set down her coffee cup. Let them look, she said. Outside, 4,000 ships continued their advance through the dark. Inside, the Harbinger system cycled at 92% patient and precise, and the unclassified structures along its hull absorbed power and held it and waited for the order that had not come yet. Kovacs picked up her coffee cup again. There was no rush. The first ship disappeared at 3:17 hours ship time. There was no explosion. There was no flash of light. There was no distress signal, no debris field, no radiation burst from a reactor going critical. There was nothing. One moment the Keth Spear-class destroyer Velkesh Prime was in formation at the far left edge of the fleet's advance column, running at standard cruise speed, all systems nominal, crew of 412 at their stations. The next moment it was not there. The gap in formation was what triggered the first alert. An automated spacing system noticed that vessel 408 had dropped out of its designated slot and flagged it for the fleet coordinator. The fleet coordinator looked at the gap and looked at his sensor readout and looked at the gap again. No debris, no energy signature, no emergency transponder, no hull fragments. On the long-range scan, the Velkesh Prime and its crew of 412 had simply stopped existing in any way that his instruments could detect. He reported it to High Marshal Grevath at 3:18. Grevath was not asleep. He had not slept. Since the human ship appeared, he was standing at his observation window, drinking something that his species needed the way humans needed coffee, looking at the stars when the alert came through. He read it twice. Sensor malfunction, he asked. We checked. All sensors are functioning correctly. Fleet-wide diagnostic shows no errors. The vessel itself, navigation error. They dropped out of formation and their transponder failed. We've been trying to raise them on all frequencies for 4 minutes. No response. Their last automated fleet ping was received at 3:16 with all systems showing green. At 3:17 they were gone. Grevath looked at the gap in his formation on the tactical display. 412. Crew, a destroyer that had served in 6 campaigns just gone. Increase sensor sweep radius, he said. Find them. The sweep found nothing. Grevath stood with his hands behind his back and looked at the human ship on the main screen, sitting dark and patient. 210,000 km ahead, still not moving, still not broadcasting. The power cycles in its hull structures were still running at that same slow, deliberate rhythm. He could not connect the disappearance to the human ship. He had no mechanism, no weapon he knew of worked that way. Silently at range, leaving nothing behind. It did not match any weapons profile in the Keth database, and the Keth database was the most comprehensive record of galactic military technology in existence. They had collected it across 200 years of expansion. They had taken it from species far more advanced than humanity could have been. A reactor cascade, said his chief weapons officer. Sometimes they go cold instead of hot. A full containment failure that suppresses the explosion, leaving zero debris. The weapons officer did not have an answer for that. Maintain formation, Grevath said. Continue the advance. His fleet obeyed. The second ship disappeared at 3:44. This time there were witnesses. The Velkesh Hammer asterisk running adjacent to the new gap where the first destroyer had been, reported to fleet command that their neighboring vessel had simply ceased to be present. The crew of the asterisk Hammer were watching because by now half the fleet was watching. They were watching the empty space where their formation mate had been and thinking about the fact that no one had found any wreckage. The asterisk Hammer's asterisk captain reported no flash of light, no shock wave, no electromagnetic pulse, no gravitational anomaly. The ship was there, and then a section of space that had contained a ship was just space. Then the asterisk Hammer itself disappeared. 3 minutes later, the report of the asterisk Hammer's asterisk disappearance came into Grevath's command deck from the next vessel in line, which had been watching and recording, and the recording showed the same thing, a ship and then not a ship in the span of a single frame of sensor footage, less than a millisecond. A 200M destroyer had gone from present to absent with no intermediate stage. Grevath watched the recording 4 times. No explosion, no flash, no physics. He recognized the ship was there, and then the space was empty, and it was clean space too. Not the churned up particle scattered space that a large object leaves behind. Even when it moves, it was as if the ship had been erased. His command deck was very quiet. Options, he said. His staff gave him options. Sensor, ghosts, weapons malfunction, some kind of new human technology, spatial anomaly. In this region of space, unrelated to the human ship, equipment error, mass hallucination, someone actually said that, and no one laughed because the alternative was accepting what the recording showed. Grevath listened to all of them. He was a careful man, a thorough man. He had not led 23 successful campaigns by panicking when things went wrong. Distance to the human vessel, he said. 190,000 km. And the disappearances, where in our formation are they occurring? His tactical officer pulled up the display. The first two ships had been at the extreme left edge of the advance column. The third had been at the extreme right edge. The fourth, there had been a fourth. During the conversation flagged by the automated alert while they were talking, was from the forwardmost tip of the advance, the outer edges of the formation, the forward tip, the perimeter. Grevath stared at the pattern. It was not random. Something was touching the edges of his fleet. All ships, he said, tighten formation, pull the outer columns in. I want the fleet compact, maximum density. Nothing on the perimeter. The fleet obeyed. 4,000 ships began to move, pulling inward, compressing the formation. It was excellent military discipline, and it happened in under 8 minutes, which was impressive for a fleet this size. The fifth ship disappeared from what had, before the formation tightened, been the new outer edge. The sixth went 7 minutes after that. Something was still touching the edges. No matter how tight they pulled, the edges were still there, and whatever was happening to the ships at those edges kept happening. How? Said his tactical officer. He said it quietly, not as a question for Grevath, but as a question for the universe, and the universe did not answer. Rate of disappearances, Grevath said. 6 ships in approximately 90 minutes. The rate appears to be variable, but there's no sign of it stopping. 6 ships, 2,400. Crew, gone without a trace in 90 minutes, and no one on his command deck could tell him where they had gone or how. He made himself look at the human ship. Again. It had not moved, it had not fired, its power cycle was running at a slightly higher rate than before. He could see it in the sensor feed, that slow, deliberate pulse, a little faster, a little deeper. But it had not aimed anything at him. It had not charged any system that looked like a weapon. It was just there, sitting at the boundary of human space, waiting. Admiral Kovacs watched the Kaith formation compress on her tactical screen. Smart, she said. Does it change anything? Reyes asked. No. She reached for her coffee cup, empty. She considered this for a moment and decided it was not worth getting up for. What's our fold count? 6 confirmed. 7th is initializing. Now. Kovacs nodded. On her screen, the Kaith fleet was a dense, bright cluster, pulling tighter and tighter as each disappearance drove them toward each other. She understood the logic. If the edges are vulnerable, protect the edges. By eliminating them, move to the center. Make yourself a smaller target. The problem, as she had explained to the development team at the facility in the asteroid belt back when this had all been theory and argument and late night coffee, was that this ship's weapon did not have edges. It had a radius. Everything inside that radius was inside. There was no safe center. There was no inner zone to retreat to. The formation compacting just meant that when the fold field reached the inner ships, they would all be very close together. She had not shared this information with the Kaith. She had not felt it was her responsibility. How are they responding overall? She asked. Fleet-wide, said her communications officer, whose job right now was passive monitoring of all Kaith tactical frequencies. We're reading elevated communication traffic between ships. No. Coherent military response pattern. Lots of. He paused, checking the translation feed. Lots of internal fleet communication that reads as confusion. and fear, and Greveth. He hasn't broadcast anything externally. He's still not hailing us. Kovacs understood that too. Greveth was a proud man. He had conquered 23 civilizations. He did not ask questions of people he intended to conquer. Asking would mean acknowledging that he did not understand what was happening to him. And acknowledging that would mean accepting that he might be in a situation he could not control. He would wait until he had no other option. She had planned for that. She checked the time, estimated time to full radius contact at their current formation density and our current cycle rate, Ray said. Running the numbers, approximately 19 hours to complete envelope if they hold position. They won't hold position, Kovacs said. They'll try something, they'll try several somethings. What I want to know is whether any of it will matter. Reyes looked at her. He was 26 years old and had been assigned to this ship because he was the best systems officer his class had produced in 8 years, and because he had the specific personality type that the psychological screening called functionally unbothered by large-scale threat assessment, which was the official way of saying that large terrible things did not stop him from doing his job. No, he said, none of it will matter. Kovacs nodded. She picked up her empty coffee cup, looked into it, and set it back down. 9th hour is the critical point, she said. That's when they'll figure out what the radius is. When they figure out the radius, they'll know there's no edge to protect. That's when they'll either run or they'll charge. What happens if they charge? They get there faster. Reyes looked at the screen for a moment. Admiral, what happens to them in the fold? What's it like in there? Cav X was quiet for a moment. Dark, she said. He did not ask more than that. Outside, the Keth fleet was a knot of light and discipline and growing terror, pressing itself tighter and tighter. And the dark ship held its position at the boundary of human space and breathed its slow electric breath. And the fold field expanded outward at the mathematical pace of something that had never learned urgency, because urgency implied doubt. In the gap where the 6th ship had been a small region of space that had recently held 400 crew was now completely empty, not even residual heat, not even ionized particles, just space, clean and cold and permanent. The Keth fleet tightened its formation, and its ships pressed against each other, and the crews inside them watched their formation shrink and knew in the animal part of every thinking species that lives long enough to develop fear that something was very wrong. Not the kind of wrong you reported to your commander, the kind of wrong that had no form, the kind of wrong that made the dark between stars feel closer than it ever had before. Ship 8 disappeared at 6:11. Ship 9 at 6:19. The rate was accelerating. The Keth had met humanity 31 years ago. The first contact had not been between warships, it had been between a Keth exploration vessel running a standard expansion survey and a human deep space research station called Asterisk. Heliod 7 Asterisk, which was studying the magnetic behavior of a binary star system and had, by pure accident, ended up in the path of the survey route. The humans on Asterisk Heliod 7 had been excited. They had sent welcome messages in 17 languages. They had broadcast music, actual music pieces, from something called classical composition, which the Keth translator Systems had taken some time to process. They had offered to share their stellar magnetic data, which the Keth had no interest in, and ask questions about Keth biology, culture, and history that the Keth survey crew had found mildly offensive and then deeply strange, and then eventually something close to charming in the way that a small animal enthusiastically approaching a larger predator could be briefly charming before the situation resolved itself. The Keth survey captain had filed a standard report, new species, encountered pre-expansion tier, moderate technological development, emotionally expressive, territorial, assessment, low difficulty, recommend, flagging for standard expansion protocol. When Third Fleet completes current operations, he had sent that report and moved on. The humans had spent the next 6 months trying to hail his vessel with follow-up questions. He had not responded. What happened next was something the Keth intelligence apparatus had not fully predicted, though it should have. Humanity had, at the moment of that first contact, been in the early stages of building what it considered credible interstellar defense network. Nothing impressive by galactic standards, light cruisers patrol, frigates, orbital defense platforms, the kind of military you built when you were a species that had learned the hard way through its own history of internal wars that it was better to have a defense and not need it. When the Keth survey vessel departed, without another word, the humans had done what humans did with insufficient information. They had imagined the worst, and then they had gotten to work. The silence came first. Within 3 years of first contact, humanity had pulled back its deep space broadcast almost entirely. The cheerful signals they had been beaming at the galaxy for 200 years, the music and the mathematical proofs and the hello, we're here, please talk to us transmissions went quiet. Their outer exploration vessels turned around, their expansion slowed to a stop, and then reversed, pulling colony ships back toward the core systems. To any outside observer, humanity looked like a species that had gotten scared, retreated, and was now quietly hoping to be overlooked. The Keth intelligence assessment, updated 6 years after first contact, noted this pattern and interpreted it exactly that way. Species has detected expansion threat, retreating to defensive posture. Assessment unchanged, low difficulty. What the assessment missed was everything happening inside the boundary of human space. The human defense budget in the year of first contact had been, by the standards of their government structures, significant but not extraordinary. A strong commitment but not a crisis. Response, by 3 years after first contact, it had tripled. By 5 years it had grown beyond anything their governments had ever approved in peacetime. By 10 years, it was consuming resources at a scale that required restructuring their entire interstellar economy. They were not building cruisers. They were not building orbital platforms. Things they were building did not have names in any public document. The project had 3 official titles, 3 different government systems. Informally, the people who worked on it called it what it was, the answer. Asterisk. Dr. Priya Anand had joined the project in its 7th year. She was a theoretical physicist who had spent the first decade of her career working on spatial geometry, not as a weapons application, simply as mathematics, the kind of pure abstract work that had no obvious use but occasionally turned out to be the Foundation of everything. When the project recruiter had found her at a conference on what was then called Fold Space Theory, she had been giving a lecture to 37 people in a mid-sized auditorium about the mathematical possibility of compressing a region of space-time to a fraction of its normal dimensions without releasing energy. The recruiter had waited until after the lecture and then asked her a question. What would happen to matter inside the compressed region? Annan had thought about it. It would still be there, she had said, just compressed along with the space. From outside, the space would appear empty. The matter would still exist. It would just be inside a region that appeared to outside instruments as a point. Could you reverse it? She had thought about that too. Theoretically, yes. You need to know exactly where the compressed region was and apply the exact inverse fold. In practice, it would be very difficult. You need to know the precise fold coordinates. The recruiter had handed her a card. We have a project you might find interesting, he had said. She had found it interesting. 14 years later, the thing she and 1,100 other scientists and engineers had built was 47 km long, running at 0.6 g, and sitting at the boundary of human space, watching 4,000 alien warships try to understand why their colleagues kept disappearing. Annan herself was not on the ship. She was on Earth. She was watching the telemetry data on a screen in a room in Geneva and eating a sandwich, and the sandwich was good and she was not particularly afraid. She had named the core system herself the compression, not because she was dramatic, but because it was accurate. And she preferred accurate names for things. The compression was exactly what it sounded like. The harbinger generated a fold field, a region of compressed space-time that expanded outward from the ship at a controlled rate. Any vessel that entered the fold field's radius did not get shot, did not get destroyed, did not explode. It got folded. The space around it compressed, and the ship compressed with it, and from the perspective of outside observers, the ship simply ceased to be present in the normal dimensions of space. It went somewhere else, not a different location, not a different galaxy, but a different layer of the same space. Compressed layer, a very small, very dark, very permanent layer. The ships were still there in a technical sense. They were just in a place that had no exits. Annan had spent a long time thinking about the ethics of that. She had arrived at the same place most of the project's senior scientists had arrived. The Keth had destroyed the Valorian homeworld 8 years after first contact with humanity. The Valerians had been the other species the humans had found during their early exploration, a quiet, careful people who communicated primarily through color and light and had been in the early stages of developing interstellar travel. Humanity had been in contact with them. For 3 years, they had exchanged culture. They had traded science. There had been a human linguist who had learned their color language and a Valorian explorer who had learned enough English to write a short, graceful essay about what stars looked like to eyes that perceived frequencies no human could see. The Keth had arrived at the Valorian homeworld with 800 ships. The Valerians had 12 defensive platforms and 4 patrol vessels. The battle, such as it was, had lasted 40 minutes. The Valorian homeworld was now called Keth, Administrative Territory 70 East *, and the 3 million Valyrians who had survived the initial attack were currently working in Keth, mineral extraction facilities and would do so until they died. Annan had received the news of the Valorian homeworld while she was in her second year on the project. She had sat with it for a day, then she had gone back to work. She had not struggled with the ethics question after that. On the Harbinger's command deck, it was approaching hour 9. Kovacs had been right about the 9-hour mark. She had been right about it because she understood people, all kinds of people, including Keth people. And she knew what desperation looked like when it did the math. The Keth fleet had tried 4 things in the hours since the disappearances began. They had tried long-range bombardment, a spread of their heaviest ship-to-ship missiles launched in a concentrated barrage at the Harbinger's position. The Harbinger's hull was designed for a great many things, and one of them was absorbing impact. The missiles had hit. The hull had held. The compression had continued cycling. This was not because the hull was impervious. It was not, but because the Harbinger's designers had understood that the ship's survival during the operation depended not on being impossible to damage, but on being impossible to stop. The compression didn't need the ship to be perfect, it needed the ship to be present. They had tried sending a small strike force, 40 destroyers in a tight cluster, on a direct attack run, moving fast in group to minimize their time in the fold field's outer radius. The destroyers had made it approximately 60% of the way to the Harbinger before the fold field, which was not uniform at the edges, had taken the 2 outermost ships in the formation. The remaining 38 had broken off and retreated. None of the crew on those ships had been able to describe what they saw when their formation mates disappeared, because there had been nothing to see. They had tried pulling the entire fleet back out of the fold field's radius. This had slowed the rate of disappearances. It had not stopped them. The Snort's fold field expanded. It was patient. And now Grievous had done the math. He had counted ships and counted the rate and counted the radius as best his sensors could measure it. And he had arrived at a number that his staff had confirmed and reconfirmed and confirmed again, because no one wanted to be the one to tell the High Marshal what the number meant. The number meant that if the fleet held its position, no ship would reach the Harbinger before the fold field consumed the entire fleet. The fold field radius was growing at approximately 30 km per hour. His fleet pulled back to its current position, occupied a sphere of space with a diameter of roughly 4,000 km. The math was not complicated. Gravath stood at his window and did not speak for a long time. His staff waited. They had the look of people who had prepared 10 different options and understood in their bones that none of the options worked. "It keeps expanding," he said finally. It was not a question. "Yes, High Marshal. Is there an outer limit, a range at which it stops?" "We cannot determine that yet, based on current expansion rate. No, we have not identified an outer limit." Gravath looked at the Harbinger, dark, still patient, that slow pulse in its hull structures, slightly faster now than it had been 9 hours ago. "How many have we lost?" 41 ships, High Marshal. 41, 16,800. Crew in 9 hours without a single shot. fired without a single piece of wreckage to show for it. If we retreat beyond its current radius, fully outside its expansion front, can we hold there indefinitely? His science officer hesitated. We believe so, if we match our retreat speed exactly to its expansion rate, we can stay ahead of it. But we would be retreating from human space entirely. And the field appears to be, it shows no sign of slowing. It may eventually cover this entire region. So our choices are retreat or advance. Yes, a full fleet charge at maximum speed. If the entire fleet charges simultaneously, the ships at the outer edge would be lost, but the inner ships, the bulk of the fleet, would reach the asterisk harbinger before the fold field consumed them. What happens when they reach it? We don't know. We don't know what it takes to destroy that vessel, or whether destroying it stops the field. Grevath was quiet again. What if we've already lost the range to charge? His tactical officer said quietly. What if the field is already beyond the point where any of us can reach the ship before it takes us? No one answered. The fold field continued its slow expansion. Somewhere in the middle of the fleet formation, Ship 42 disappeared. There was no flash, there was no sound. There was just a hole in formation, and the ships on either side of it which had watched it happen filed the same report that 37 other ships before them had filed. Vessel present, vessel absent, no transition observed, no wreckage. The Kaith command deck was very quiet. Grevath looked at the human ship, and the human ship looked back at nothing, felt nothing, said nothing. And in that silence, for the first time in 40 years of conquest, Grevath considered a word that had never before been relevant to his career. Run. At hour 11 the harbinger spoke. One transmission, one frequency, all 57 human languages on record, and then a 58th that the Kaith translation system needed 4 minutes to process, because it was not a language humans used with each other, but a language they had reconstructed from fragments, a color and light language partially decoded, partial enough to be understood, if not perfectly spoken. The color language portion was brief. It said in approximate translation, the small bright people who made their words from light we remember. Then the transmission switched to Kath. High Marshal Grevath received it on his command deck. He listened to it twice. Then he had his translation systems run it through again to make sure nothing had been mistranslated, because he wanted to be very certain he had the exact words before he decided how to respond. The transmission said, "This is Admiral Nadia Kovacs of the United Human Fleet Vessel Harbinger of Silence. You have been inside the compression field for 11 hours and 14 minutes. You have lost 47 ships. You will continue to lose ships at an accelerating rate for as long as you remain within our operational range. I am contacting you now not because your situation is salvageable. It is not, but because I believe in giving a thinking species the information it needs to make a decision. You have one decision available to you. Leave human space and do not return. If you choose this, the field will not pursue you beyond the boundary marker at coordinates I am now transmitting. If you do not choose this, if you advance, if you hold position, if you delay beyond what I am estimating as your remaining window, the field will eventually reach every ship in your formation. I want to be precise about what that means. Your ships are not destroyed. They are compressed. They still exist in a reduced spatial layer. Your crew is alive. They will remain alive for some time. They will be in complete darkness in a space they cannot exit, with no means of communication and no means of rescue. This is not a threat. It is a description of what is already happening to your missing ships and crews. I am telling you because you deserve to know. You have approximately 6 hours before the decision is made for you. This is the only transmission you will receive. The transmission ended. Gravitas stood at the center of his command deck and no one spoke. He had led 23 campaigns. He had received a great many ultimatums. Every civilization that understood it was losing eventually tried to negotiate or threaten or bargain, and he had heard all of it, all the desperate posturing of species that had run out of options and were reaching for the one thing they had left, which was words. He had learned to discount words. Words were what you used when you did not have anything else. This transmission did not feel like that. This transmission had the tone of someone reading the weather report. Not threatening, not triumphant, not pleading, just informational. The way you told someone that rain was coming and they should bring a coat, not because you were threatening them with rain, but because they were going to be standing in it either way, and knowing in advance seemed useful. He rewound the transmission and listened to the section about his missing crews. Again, your ships are not destroyed. They are compressed. Your crew is alive. They will remain alive for some time. He sat down. He sat down in his command chair, which he had not done in 11 hours, and he pressed his hands flat against his knees and stared at his tactical display. 47 ships, 47 crews, somewhere in a layer of compressed space in complete darkness. Alive. He had spent 11 hours understanding this as a military problem, numbers and formations and tactical options. This was the first moment he had understood it as something else. His communications officer was watching him. His tactical staff was watching him. His fleet coordination team was watching him. They were all watching him because he was the High Marshal, and that meant he was the one who decided, and all of them in their separate minds were doing the same math he was doing. 47 gone, 4,169. Still here, 6 hours left. He thought about the 23 civilizations he had conquered. He thought about the Valyrians. He thought about the Valyrian home world, which was now called Keth, administrative territory 70 East, and the 3 million Valyrians working in mineral extraction, and the human linguist who had learned to speak in color and light. The human ship had included the color language in its transmission. He thought about that for a long time. The color language portion was brief. The translator had noted partial, roughly decoded, but intentional. Someone had spent time, real time, learning enough of a dead language to put 4 words into a transmission to the fleet that had killed the species. Who spoke it? We remember. He had been in this job for 40 years. He had killed a great many things. He had never once in 40 years been told by a target that it remembered something he had done. Targets did not have that kind of knowledge of him. Targets did not have that kind of context. Targets knew his fleet was coming, and they scrambled, and they defended, and they failed. They did not know his history. They did not demonstrate in 2 loaded words that they had been paying attention for 3 decades. We remember. How long, Grievous said, did they know we were coming? His intelligence chief, who had spent the last 11 hours quietly reconstructing a career's worth of incorrect assessments, said, based on the scale of the project required to build that vessel, a minimum of 25 years, possibly longer. 25 years. They had known for 25 years. While Cath intelligence was filing assessments that said low difficulty and retreating to defensive posture, humanity had been building this thing in secret for 25 years. And we saw nothing, Greveth said. We saw what they wanted us to see. High Marshal, the silence, the retreat, we interpreted it correctly as a fear response. We missed that the retreat was. The intelligence chief paused. A preparation, not a surrender. Greveth looked at the screen. The dark ship sat where it had been since the beginning, patient as a mountain, its hull structures pulsing in that slow, regular rhythm. He had watched that rhythm for 11 hours. Now it had the quality of something that could continue indefinitely. Option analysis, he said, one final time. His tactical officer had run the numbers so many times by now that he did not need to pull up the display. Option 1, full fleet charge at maximum speed. 700 to 900 ships would be lost before the leading elements reach the asterisk. Harbinger, we do not know if destroying the Harbinger stops the field, and we do not know if we can destroy it. The bombardment attempt was unsuccessful. Option 2, hold position. The field continues to expand. We lose ships at an accelerating rate. Within 6 hours, the field will encompass our current position. Option 3, retreat, Greveth said. Yes, full fleet retreat, matching speed to the field's expansion rate. We exit human space. Based on the coordinates transmitted, the field does not extend beyond the marked boundary. And if she is lying about the boundary, she has given us accurate information. Throughout the disappearances, they rate the radius, all of it has been exactly as the data showed. She has not. The tactical officer stopped. He seemed to reconsider something. She has not tried to make us more afraid than the situation warranted. She has been precise. Grievous found to his surprise that he agreed. The transmission had not been designed to break him with terror. It had been designed to give him information, real, verifiable, accurate information. Kind you give someone when you want them to make a rational decision, when you want them to choose. He thought about that. About the difference between someone who wanted to destroy you and someone who wanted to give you a choice. They were not the same thing. He looked at his tactical display one more time. Then he made the decision that no Cathar High Marshal had made in 200 years of expansion. All fleet, he said, immediate withdrawal, maximum safe speed, transmit retreat coordinates to all vessels, guard formation to screen the withdrawal. We exit through the boundary. Marker at the coordinates, the human ship transmitted. His command deck was very still. High Marshal, said his fleet coordinator carefully, confirmation required for withdrawal order. I just confirmed it, Grievous said. Protocol requires. The protocol was written for circumstances I have never been in before. Confirm the order. The confirmation went out. 4,169 ships began to turn. On the asterisk Harbinger, Convex. Watch the tactical display show the Keth formation rotating slowly at First, then with the disciplined speed of a military that knew how to execute an order even when the order surprised them. They're moving, Ray said. Yes, Kovacs said. They're actually. Yes. She watched the formation begin its retreat, clean, organized, fast, even in withdrawal. Keth discipline was remarkable. She filed that away without particular emotion. Hold the field, she said. Do not reduce the expansion rate. Let them run ahead of it to the boundary. If we reduce the rate, they make it out faster, Ray offered. I know, hold the rate. She wanted them to feel every second of those 6 hours. Not out of cruelty, she was not a cruel woman. She wanted them to feel every second because species had memories, and memories became history, and history became the story that a civilization told itself about what the galaxy was like. She wanted the story to be very clear. Admiral, said the communications officer, incoming transmission, Keth. Flagship. Kovacs raised an eyebrow. She had not expected that. Put it through. The transmission was short, one sentence, in careful, formal human language. Translation that had clearly been reviewed by someone who wanted to get it exactly right. High Marshal Greveth of the Keth 3rd Expansion Fleet requests Admiral Kovacs explain what happened to the 47 crews. Kovacs considered this for a moment. She owed him nothing. The transmission protocol had been one way by design. She had given them the information they needed to decide, and they had decided. And the conversation was over. But she thought about the 47 ships. She thought about 16,000 people sitting in compressed dark, alive, waiting, not knowing. She picked up the transmission relay. Admiral Kovacs responding, she said. Your 47 ships are in a compressed spatial layer. They are intact. The crews are alive, revering. The compression requires the precise fold coordinates from our systems. I will transmit those coordinates to you now. She nodded to Rays, who transmitted the coordinates. Use them correctly and your crews come home, she said. That's a better outcome than most species get when they come to human space uninvited. I suggest you take it and remember why. She closed the transmission. Ray stared at her. You're giving them back their ships. I'm giving them back their crews. Ships are fine, they just need to be refolded. From outside, she picked up her coffee cup, found it empty again, and finally decided it was worth getting up. The Keth have a very long memory. I want the thing they remember to be specific. She crossed the command deck to the small unit against the far wall that produced coffee in 0.6 G, which was a technical challenge someone had worked very hard to solve. They'll remember that we won, Rays said. They'll remember that we could have killed 16,000 of their people and chose not to. She examined the coffee. Bad. She drank it. Those are different stories. Different stories lead to different decisions. In 40 years, maybe less, someone in the Keth political structure is going to have to decide whether to try again. I want the story they tell about this day to be the one that makes them hesitate. She turned and looked at the tactical display where 4,000 ships were running ahead of her fold field toward the boundary marker. Running, the Keth 3rd Expansion Fleet. 23 civilizations conquered, 140 billion lives under their administration. Running from one ship. She drank her terrible coffee. Track them to the boundary, she said. Full sensor coverage until the last ship crosses. Yes, Admiral. She watched them run. She felt nothing dramatic about it. No triumph, no grief, just the quiet, functional satisfaction of a problem that had been worked on for 30 years. Being solved the way you felt when a very long equation finally balanced. Clean, correct, done. The fold field continued its slow expansion behind the retreating fleet. Patient as mathematics, unhurried as deep space, indifferent as the dark between stars. Outside, the boundary marker approached. The Keth ran toward it, and the Harbinger breathed its slow electric breath and waited to see if they were wise enough to cross it. The last Keth ship crossed the boundary. Marker at 18:47 hours 22 minutes ahead of the fold field's expansion front. Kovacs noted the time. She noted the count, 4,169. Ships, same number as had begun the retreat, none lost during the withdrawal. She noted the boundary crossing, and she noted the fold field beginning to slow as the Keth fleet moved beyond the marked line, decelerating on her order from its steady 30 km/h expansion to a gradual stop. She noted all of it, and she felt primarily the specific tiredness of a person who has been awake for 23 hours and had 6 cups of bad coffee. Field holding a boundary, raise. Confirmed. Good, begin deceleration to maintenance. Pulse, don't shut it down. Keeping it active. The fold field did not stop, it slowed to a fraction of its operating speed. Still running, still cycling, the whole structures of the Harbinger still pulsing in their slow electrical rhythm. A deliberate thing, a thing that said, we did not do this on an emergency basis. We can do this whenever we choose. She wanted any sensor array in this region of space pointed at her ship to see that rhythm and understand it. They watched the Keth fleet go. It moved at speed, putting distance between itself and the boundary with a focused urgency of an organism that has been very close to something dangerous and has chosen wisely to be somewhere else. No formation anymore, just speed. Ships spreading out, finding their own lines of retreat, the tight military discipline of the advance already broken apart by hours of fear and the pure animal release of retreat. She watched them until they dropped below the range of standard sensors, tracked them on long range until they're out of the system. She said, already on it, said her long range sensor officer. She nodded and stood up from her chair, her back registering the 23 hours in it. With some specific complaints, she walked to the observation window at the side of the command deck, not the main tactical window, but the smaller one off to the left that looked out at the stars with no overlaid display, just the raw dark and the distant light. Human space, quiet, intact. She stood there for a while. The galaxy had been watching. This was not a metaphor. 14 different spacefaring civilizations had sensor assets in the region or along lines of sight to the confrontation. 2 of them had ships in the area. Observation vessels, technically. Civilian, which had maintained careful distance and full sensor recording throughout the entire event. 3 others had picked up the Keth fleet's electromagnetic signature during its approach and had time to redirect survey instruments accordingly. Every civilization in the region had watched in real time or via delayed sensor data as 4,000 Keth war ships advanced on a single vessel and then retreated from it. The recordings circulated fast. The Dreadnought Confederation received them. First, the Dreadnought were 2 star systems from the edge of Kaith territory and had been under what the Kaith officially called a * trade agreement, and the Dreadnought called something significantly less polite for 11 years. When their council received the censor recordings of the Kaith third expansion fleet crossing back out of human space, the primary reaction was silence and then a great deal of very rapid talking that their diplomatic archives later classified as * extraordinary. Session duration 14 hours. The Soviet Communion received the recording 6 hours later. The Soviet had fought the Kaith 30 years ago and lost a significant portion of their outer territories. Their initial response was to watch the recordings 3 times. Their second response was to send a diplomatic mission to human space. Not the first time they had tried this, but the first time they sent a mission that included their senior military attaché, their head of science, and a personal letter from their communion elder. The Valyrians, what remained of them, working in mineral extraction facilities in Kaith Administrative Territory 70 East, received the recordings via encrypted data drops coordinated by a human intelligence network that had been operating inside Kaith-controlled space for 11 years. The recordings passed through the facility populations in whispers and hidden communication devices and folded pieces of material scratched with light patterns. There are no official records of what the Valyrian population's response was. There are accounts. One account from a Valyrian named Teth, who makes blue, describes the moment the recording reached her as the feeling of seeing a color you had been told no longer existed. The Kaith received their own recordings, and then received, 6 hours after the retreat, the fold coordinates for their 47 missing ships. Their Fleet Science Corps spent 3 days verifying the coordinates before attempting the refold. When they did it, when they opened the compressed layers and 17 destroyers and 30 support vessels unfolded back into normal space, their hulls intact, their crews shaken and dehydrated, and some of them deeply psychologically damaged, but alive. The recordings of the asterisk recovery also circulated. 14 civilizations watched the Kaith retrieve their lost ships from a spatial fold. What they understood from that second set of recordings was the same thing Kovacs had intended them to understand. Humanity had given the ships back. This piece of information moved through galactic diplomatic channels in ways that took years to fully trace. Species that had defeated a Kaith expansion fleet and then returned the prisoners was a species that was making a statement about what it intended to be. Not a conqueror, not a victim, something else, something that did not have a clean precedent in the galactic diplomatic vocabulary and therefore required a great deal of conversation to process. That conversation was still happening 5 years later. Greveth filed his report when his ship was safely out of the system. It was the most difficult document he had written in 40 years of service. He was a thorough man, and he did not soften the conclusions. The conclusions were the third expansion fleet encountered a human vessel with weapons, technology of unknown type and unknown limit. The vessel demonstrated capabilities beyond anything in Kaith. Intelligence records, expansion protocol for human territory is suspended pending Full intelligence reassessment. Assessment timeline, unknown. He did not write about the color. Language, he filed that part separately. In a personal log that he marked. Private, and he sat with it for a long time in the quiet of his cabin after he had sent the official report. We remember. 2 words in a partially reconstructed, dead language put into a transmission by someone who had learned that language, specifically so they could say them. He thought about what that took, the patience of it, the long game of it. You learned a language not for diplomacy, not for trade, not for the ordinary reason species learned each other's communication. You learned it so that on the day you stopped a fleet that came to conquer, you could say 2 words to that fleet in the language of the people that fleet had already destroyed. We remember. Not we are angry, not we will avenge. Not you will pay, just we remember, we know what you did, we have not forgotten, we how to speak to the dead so we could tell you that. He had conquered 23 civilizations. He had killed things that could not be uncreated. He had done all of it with the clean certainty of a species that believed the galaxy sorted itself into categories, those who could and those who could not, and the ones who could had an obligation to do so. He sat in his cabin with that certainty, for the first time feeling like something that was not certain. He did not reach a conclusion that night. He was 58 years old and had been what he was for 40 years, and people did not reach different conclusions in a single night after 40 years, but something had changed in the architecture of his thinking. Something had been moved, not demolished, just moved. He thought that was probably what the human admiral had intended. He thought she had probably anticipated exactly this. The patience of it continued to unsettle him. 6 months after the confrontation, a Sorveth diplomatic vessel was cleared to dock at a human deep space station. The human diplomatic team that met them was small, 3 people. The lead diplomat was a woman named Oren Vasquez, who was warm and informal and spoke excellent Sorveth and had prepared as a gesture of good faith a meal that incorporated ingredients from the Sorveth home system that she had sourced from a trader at considerable personal expense and effort. The Sorveth diplomat, a senior official named Vasreth, whose species communicated through both sound and subtle shifts in skin pigmentation, spent the first hour of the meeting simply watching the humans, watching how they moved, how they treated their own staff, how they poured water for the Sorveth guests before themselves. Small behaviors, the things that told you what a species was like underneath its official communications. Then he asked the question he had traveled for weeks to ask. The transmission, he said, the color, language, the Valorian words, was that political decision, a strategic one. Vasquez thought about it honestly. Both, she said, and also neither. We learned it because it mattered to us too. Learn it, the Valyrians were they were. People we knew, we weren't going to let their language die because that was convenient for someone else. Vasroth's skin shifted slightly. His translator rendered it as asterisk, something close to recognition. The Keth are going to come back, he said, eventually, you understand that? Probably, Vasquez said, not soon, but eventually. And your single ship, it will stop them. Again. Our ships, she said. He went still. The Harbinger is not our only vessel of that type, she said. It was the one we chose to reveal, There are 7 more. She held the number in the air for a moment. They are positioned. They are active. Vasroth's skin ran through 3 colors. Very quickly. 7, he said. 7, she said. We built one. We learned from it. We built 7 more. She poured more water into his glass. We had 30 years. We used them. He was quiet for a long time. What do you want from us? He said. Finally, from this meeting, what is the human goal? Vasquez set down the water. We want to know you. We want to know the Dareth, the other civilizations that the Keth have been collecting. We want to understand what the galaxy looks like. From where you stand, we're not building an alliance. We're not promising protection or demanding loyalty. She paused. We're just ending a period where we were alone and quiet. We were quiet for 30 years because we needed to be. We don't need to be anymore. He looked at her for a long time. You were afraid, he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. Yes, she said. We were very afraid. We're good at being afraid and doing things anyway. It's kind of our whole history. His skin moved again. Humor recognized. Responding in kind. You are very strange, he said. Consistently, she agreed. Kavex was on Earth when the diplomatic reports from the Sorvith meeting crossed her desk. She read them in her office at the Naval Complex in Johannesburg with actual good coffee, real gravity, real beans. No engineering compromises. And a window that looked out over a city that was loud and alive and completely unaware of everything that had almost been taken from it 6 months ago. She read the Sorvith report. She read the intelligence summary of the Keth fleet's current status, which showed Grevas' fleet back in Kethcore territory, his fleet dispersed back to home ports, no new expansion orders filed. She read the intercept of Keth internal political communication, which was carefully translated and conservatively interpreted, and still, underneath all the official language, clearly the sound of a large and powerful government trying to decide what the confrontation had meant. She read the report from the Valorian underground networks, the data drops, the recordings that had made it into the labor facilities, the fragments of response, the feeling of seeing a color you had been told no longer existed. She set that one down on her desk and looked at it for a moment. Then she finished her coffee and pulled up the maintenance report on the Harbinger, which had docked for its first post-operation service review and was currently in the facility in the asteroid belt with its fold field offline for the first time in 8 months, its hull undergoing inspection, its crew on leave. Everything was within specification. Some hull wear at the expected stress points. Fold coil 7 had run slightly hot during the final phase and would need recalibration, otherwise fine, better than fine. Actually, the ship had performed within 3% of design parameters throughout the operation, which, given that this had been its first actual operational deployment, was, as the engineering chief noted in his report, frankly incredible and also personally vindicating. She approved the maintenance schedule and the crew's leave extension. She thought about writing a report about the operation, a full assessment, lessons learned, recommendations for doctrine, analysis of Keth response patterns. She would write it, but not today. She looked out the window at the city. 6 months ago, this city had not known that 4,000 warships were moving toward It had been loud and alive and unaware the way cities were when someone else was making sure the thing they couldn't know about was being handled. That was the job, not the glory of it. There was no parade, no public ceremony. The operation was still classified at the highest level and would remain so for years. Not the recognition, just the window, the city, loud and alive and still here. She thought about Greveth watching the fold field swallow his ships and choosing finally to turn around. She thought about what it had cost him. 40 years of being something, and then one day choosing not to be that anymore. She didn't know if he had managed it. She didn't know if one confrontation was enough to move a person after 40 years. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe his retreat was tactical and temporary, and he would be back in 5 years with 8,000 ships and a new plan. But she thought about the separate private log entry he had filed. The intelligence service had it, of course. The one about the color language. When he had marked private and then not encrypted, as if he had known it might be read and had decided he didn't mind. She thought that maybe he had needed someone to know that he had noticed, that the two words had landed, that they had moved something in the architecture of his thinking, even if he didn't know yet what they had moved it into. People were complicated, even people who had done terrible things, especially those. She finished her coffee. Outside, Johannesburg was loud and alive, and the sun was doing something interesting with the late afternoon light over the buildings, and somewhere in the asteroid belt, the Harbinger was resting with its coils cool for the first time in months, and 7 other dark ships sat in 7 other quiet positions at the edges of human space, their fold fields at maintenance pulse, their whole structures breathing their slow electrical breath, patient present, waiting without urgency for whatever the galaxy decided to do next. Whatever it decided, the answer was already built, and it had taken 30 years and 1,100 scientists and the memory of a small, bright people who had made their words from light, and it sat in the dark, between stars like a piece of the dark, that had grown sharp edges and learned, finally, that it did not have to be afraid.